So we'll get started now, and I want to say thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Eugenia, and we've got Sophie with us here as well. And we are from Middlesex University in the Education Liaison and Outreach team, which means that our role is all about supporting students with applying to university, including thinking about personal statements, interviews, UCAS, and all those other areas. So today we are going to be talking about personal statements. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll leave lots of time at the end to go through that to make sure that we get all your questions answered. We're going to start off with just talking about some things that you need to know about personal statements and providing an overview. And we're also going to do a bit of a workshop on what you can do to improve your personal statements if you've started already, and to give you some ideas for the content of what you could write in your paragraphs. So if we can go on to the first slide, that'd be great.
Hi everyone, as Eugenia mentioned, I'm Sophie, so I'm also from the Education Liaison and Outreach team, and I'm really looking forward to going through exactly what to include in your personal statement. And we felt like it would be a really good place to start by just reminding you exactly what a statement looks like. So it'll be 4,000 characters, which is roughly 500 words, and that's about one side of A4 paper. And in your statement, you would include information about why you want to study your chosen course, and that would be in the first section of your statement. You'd be covering your motivation to study, your inspirations, any ambitions that you have career-wise, or future goals. And then you would cover what exactly makes you suitable for the course that you have chosen. So you draw on your academic experience, so everything that you've done in school or college, whether that's GCSEs or current studies, A-levels. Any other relevant experience you have, whether that's work experience or achievements that you've made, and extracurricular activities that are transferable to your chosen course as well. And you would summarize this at the end in just a couple of sentences to sum up exactly what you're looking forward to the most.
So one of the key parts of the personal statement is structure. So just a note that this is for September 2025 entry. There will be some changes coming in the year after that, which we'll go through briefly on the next slide. But here, the structure, if you're thinking of applying to university for September, this is a recommended structure. So although you have kind of a blank piece of paper to write your personal statement on, we really recommend you dividing your work up into paragraphs and focusing on a different section in each paragraph. It's going to really help you come up with more ideas for your personal statement, and it's going to help the whole personal statement feel a little bit more focused, and make sure that you cover all the different parts of your experience. So this is a recommended structure. You don't need to follow it exactly, but it's a really good starting point for you to try and think of which order to put your experience in and what sort of things you might want to cover. So we always recommend that you start with your academic experience. You want your personal statement to be as focused on the subjects you're applying for as possible, which means that a lot of it will be quite academic. So focus on what you studied at school or college, what extracurricular activities and extra research you've done, or even work experience that you've done that's really tailored to your course. So we recommend for any personal statement that you begin with why you want to study the course. That's the question that your whole personal statement is answering. Because that's what universities really want to hear is what is your motivation? What's inspired you to study that course? And then going on to talk about how your experience at school or college has prepared you for university. So it's not about writing about every module, every topic that you've studied, but what's really relevant for that subject you're studying, or what's really inspired you in some of the subjects and some of the projects that you've done. And then moving on to, have you been involved in any sports, clubs, or societies? So here, again, especially if these sports or the clubs are really relevant to the subject that you're studying, want to put them a little bit higher up in your personal statement and try and think of the transferable skills that these have given you. So for example, if you're applying to law and you're part of a debating society, that could give you really good experience to write about. And then for your second part of the personal statement can be non-academic. So focused on any work experience that might not be as related to the subject, or any hobbies that you've done, or other commitments outside of school that you feel have prepared you for university. Even if they are not completely relevant to what you're studying, try and think of the transferable skills. So what skills have you gained from them that will be useful in your degree? So for example, if you are applying for a science degree, but you do a lot of team sports, think about what skills you've learned through that could be really helpful for your degree. So for example, working as a team or communication skills that could be really helpful on working on specific science projects. And then at the end, we have a conclusion. We always recommend that you include this because you want your personal statement to be a piece of academic writing. You want to show your academic writing skills here. So having a short conclusion that's just a few sentences that summarizes your skills, really key to kind of bring everything together in your personal statement, and also show that it's an academic piece of writing and that it's a well-structured essay.
We also wanted to note that there are some changes coming into the personal statement if you're applying for 2026. It might be that most of us here are looking at 2025 entry, but for any of us that might be super organised and thinking ahead to the following year, we wanted to just make you aware of exactly what those changes are. Generally, the statement will cover the exact same information and it will be the exact same length. So it's still going to be 4,000 characters, which is about 1 page. And you're still going to answer all of the questions that Eugenia has just mentioned and cover all of that same content. The main difference here is going to just be the structure of the statement. So instead of them saying, write a side of A4 covering all of these topics, they will ask you to write your answers to 3 questions, which will prompt you on the topics that we've just covered. So really, it's just the structure that changes. It will just be that you look at each question separately, but ultimately your statement is still being reviewed as a whole. So everything that you write across those 3 questions will be read in one sitting. So you do want to make sure that you're not repeating ideas across different sections, because one member of staff will still be reading everything that you write, even though they have broken it up. And the purpose of them restructuring the statement in this way is just to support you to make sure that you are covering all of the necessary questions. But as I said, the content will ultimately still be exactly the same, whether you're looking at 2025 or 26. So everything we discussed today will be relevant for both sets of students. It's just a case of how you structure it for 26 looking slightly different.
So we often get asked who reads the personal statement, and it's something worth just bearing in mind for when you're thinking about what you should be writing about, which topics you should cover. So universities have admissions teams, and that's a team that works on reviewing your applications. And it might also be read by lecturers. So the person reading your personal statement might be an expert in that subject. So it's not so much about explaining what the subject is that you're applying for, explaining certain topics about it. It's about showing your interest. What is it in that specific subject that interests you? What areas or what themes in that subject has really motivated you to apply for university? And the person reading it also doesn't know what your skills are and what your hobbies are. And so it's a really good chance to kind of show those interests outside of just your grades or the information that goes through UCAS. And it's also a really good opportunity to reflect on your experiences. Depending on your subject, you might have an interview as well. So writing that personal statement is a really good chance to really prepare yourself for that interview, because you would have reflected on your experiences and thought about your motivations for that subject.
So with that in mind, we wanted to give you some examples of things you might want to cover for different subjects that you might be entering for. But obviously bearing in mind, this isn't an extensive list of every single subject you might be looking at. They're just some examples of the types of skills you might think about for different areas. And it's worth noting as well that these are all transferable skills. So regardless of your subject choice, feel free to take inspiration from any of these areas. It may be that the skills covered in each section here are also relevant for different subjects. So I won't dwell on this too much in terms of reading through exactly what skills you could think about for each area, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of inspiration of the types of things you might be thinking about. So for example, if you're looking at health and social care or science courses, you might think about some of the following skills and how you have gained them as well. Skills like communication, compassion, recognition of understanding equality and diversity, leadership, confidence, problem solving, they would all be really applicable here. If you're looking at a different course like arts and creative industry related course, you might be looking more at an ability to demonstrate your artistic abilities. So what projects have you done that show your creativity? What experience have you had that is creative? And then again, you might also be thinking about teamwork as well, problem solving, passion, focus, drive. That's quite transferable skills, and so on and so forth. So you can see that different skills feed into different areas. And the key thing to remember is as well, where you are referencing skills, try to link them back to a concrete example of somewhere you have learned that skill, whether it is in your academic studies, whether it's in your extracurricular activities, or whether it's in any work experience that you've done. Think about where can you prove that skill. As opposed to just listing different skills, you really want to root them in evidence of exactly where you've gained them. But yeah, these are really just a starting point of the types of transferable skills to be thinking about when you're doing your writing.
So we've also got a section on nursing, midwifery and social work. Just so that we have an idea, could you please click the hands up button if you're applying for any of those 3 subjects? So child, adult, nursing, mental health, nursing, midwifery or social work. Okay, I think we've got a few people here. Perfect. So we'll go through this as well. I would also recommend that we do have a workshop at 5 p.m. If you'd like me to put a link in the chat, please just drop a message in the Q&A. And that workshop is all about interviews for nursing, midwifery or social work. But we can touch on some of those areas here as well. So in your personal statements, as well as what Sophie has covered earlier about thinking about the skills that you need for nursing, midwifery, or for social work, it's good to show an understanding of those career paths as well. So thinking about what would make a good nurse or midwife, thinking about the skills that they need and how you've demonstrated those. So that could be communication, it could be being compassionate, and that doesn't need to be in a healthcare setting. So you can also reflect on when you've been caring for a family member, or when you've done a lot of babysitting, or you've done a work experience in a school, for example, thinking about where those skills overlap and where you've developed those transferable skills. And similarly for showing good timekeeping skills or showing good motivation, if you have a part-time job, even if it's not to do with healthcare, thinking about what skills that's taught you. So for example, making sure that you're on time, making sure that you're working well as a team, and think about how that can be useful for being a nurse or a midwife or a social worker. So really reflect on what you've learned about that profession and thinking about the 6 C's as well, and thinking about where you've demonstrated those skills, and then using that as content for your personal statement.
So we're going to have a look now at some different examples of ways to approach each section. So we've chosen 4 different celebrities, and what we're going to do is go through what they would like to apply for in these imaginary statements and think about what unique skills they have and how they would put that into writing to give you some really clear examples of how to put together each section. So our 4 celebrities are looking at the following 4 courses. We've got Marcus Rashford, who in this example is going to be looking at doing a politics degree. We've got Adam Peaty, who wants to do a degree in dance. We've got Malala, who is looking to study human rights law. And we've got Boris Johnson, who wants to do a theatre performance degree. So we've got a good spread there across different types of degrees, different skill sets, which will hopefully be a really good starting point for some inspiration for your writing. So we would start the statement, as Eugenia mentioned earlier, by summarizing in a couple of sentences exactly why you want to study the course that you have chosen. So here at the very start of your statement, it's really important to be clear on exactly what that course is. So naming it in the opening and what it is that has inspired you to study that. So you're going to think about questions like, why are you interested in studying the course? Is it something that has inspired you in your current studies? Is it someone who has inspired you that you have a connection with, that you are motivated by? Is it some research that you've done that has engaged you? So think really about what it is that has led you to want to apply to this course and why you find it interesting. You can also mention here, if you know them, your career ambitions. So you can think about linking your current studies and kind of study ambitions to the long-term goal as well, if you know it. So for example, if you're interested in adult nursing, you can discuss exactly what you want to do with that career in the future, if that's information that you do have already. But if not, don't feel that you have to say just yet. That's something that can also be worked out later down the line. So let's show you a great example of how to put your writing together. The way we're going to do this is we're going to show you 2 approaches to writing this paragraph, and we'd like you to identify which is the better example. So what we'll do is read out each one, and then we'll ask for a show of hands at the end, whether you think number 1 is better or whether you think number 2 is better. So get ready to respond to that after we've done the reading. Be thinking critically, what is good about this example or what could be improved. So the first example is, the reason why I want to study for a degree is because of the following reasons. I want to get a higher degree and better qualification. I want to gain more experience and knowledge. I want to improve my political skills, and I want to have a good career later. So that's example 1. Eugenia is going to read example 2, and then we'll ask for a show of hands for each one, which one is better.
Yeah, so example 2 is, I want to study a politics degree because I'm passionate about having a positive impact on people's lives. I'd love to be able to use my degree to affect positive change within our government.
So what we'll do now is a show of hands. What do we think is the better response? If you think number 1 is better, raise your hand now. We'll just give a couple of moments for everyone to put their hands up if they think it's 1.
I can also see that some people have put it in the chat. If you notice any specific things that can be improved, feel free to put that in the chat as well.
And raise your hand now if you think number 2 is better example. And then again, we'll go through reasons why that might be a choice. Okay, I can see we've got a lot of hands raised for number 2. Eugenia, could you read any responses which state why number 2 is a better example than number 1?
Don't think we have any at the moment, but we can give it maybe 30 seconds if anyone has anything that they would like to suggest.
Any flaws with the first response or anything positive about the second response? I can reveal that if you did say number 2, you are correct.
Okay, I think we've got some messages coming through. So we've got, is because the first response doesn't give you any information on what made you inspired to get a law degree in the first place. I think that's a really good point, that it's not specific to law they're quite general points about getting a higher degree and better qualification. You want your personal statement, especially at the beginning, but also throughout, to really be focused on the subject you're applying for. So anyone reading it, even without you saying, I want to apply for law, should be able to tell which subject it's for. Yeah, we've got a point that is the first one isn't very detailed. Maybe that the language is a little bit informal as well. And we've got some people pointing out that the first one has grammatical errors, which is absolutely right. We've got some spelling mistakes as well with skills and experience, and the way that it's written in a list doesn't read as academically as it should. So it's not about making your writing really complex and using kind of really complex vocabulary, but it is about making sure it's a piece of academic writing, that you're writing in full sentences, that you're really explaining your points, and you're using academic language as much as you can.
Yeah, really good range of points, everyone. That's something that we want to avoid where possible, because where we're listing information, we're not going into detail or explaining things properly or linking them back to evidence or further clarification. So that's definitely something to avoid, not only in the opening, but throughout the statement as you go through, to make it much clearer exactly how this precise course is relevant to you and your ambitions. So we're going to move on to the next section of the statement here. So I'm going to hand over to Eugenia and she's going to talk you through some more examples.
Absolutely. So the next section we have on work experience or voluntary work. I will say that if the work experience or voluntary work you've done is really relevant to the subject and it's one of the main reasons that inspired you, then it can be really good to start with this, especially if, for example, you're applying for nursing or midwifery and you've already got some work experience in a healthcare context that's really inspired you. Otherwise, you might start with your academic experience at college. So it does really depend. There's no right answers. We've just gone with work experience first. And here, what we would like to know is what skills you gain. So thinking about what specifically did you do on your work experience? Or you can also consider, what did you see someone else do on your work experience that's really inspired you? So for example, if you did some work experience in an accountancy firm and you might feel that you didn't gain as much experience from doing the practical work, what did you see accountants do that's really inspired you to learn more about that subject? And similarly, if you had work experience in a healthcare setting, it's not as much about explaining what happens in that healthcare setting, but what specifically did you see that really inspired you? What would you like to learn more about? So we'll go on to see some examples of how you might write about your work experience. Again, we're going to give you 2 examples, and then we would like you to do hands up for number 1 and number 2 once we go through them first. And if you do spot anything that you would like to comment on number 1 or number 2, please drop it in the chat and we'll have a read through afterwards. So number 1, this year I took part in a dancing competition where I learned great team working skills as I had to work with my partner to create new routines every week. Working in this challenging environment and within a close-knit team greatly improved my communication skills. We've got number 2.
I took part in a dance show and it was hard and grueling and tough, but it went well. I found it joyful and I think I would be good if I learned more about it.
So if you could please put your hand up if you think number 1 is the stronger example. Okay, I can see some hands going up. Give you about 10 more seconds. Okay, and could you do hands up if you think number 2 is a stronger example? So if you've already got your hand up, just click it again. Okay, so I think we definitely have many more for number 1. Just going to give you a a few seconds or 30 seconds, just to put some comments in the chat about why you think number 1 is a stronger example. I will say I completely agree with you. I would also go with number 1. But have a think about why we would choose number 1 or what number 2 could do to improve. You can see we've got a few comments in the chat already. Okay, we'll go through some of the things that we can see in the chat. So we've got a comment about kind of showing confidence, saying that I think it would be good to learn more about it, isn't showing your confidence. And I think I agree. I think what you want to show, it's fine to say that you want to learn more about a specific subject, because we don't expect you to have the full knowledge of the subject yet, because that's why you're going to university, to kind of gain experience and to learn a lot more and research more about the subject. But it's good to show an idea of exactly what you would like to learn more about. So making it a bit more specific. So thinking about, what is it about dance that he would like to learn more about at university? Thinking about, is it staging that he wants to learn more about, or learning more routines, or learning about costumes? So showing that detailed subject knowledge is really important. We've got a good answer here about the first one is well written and links to how they've improved their skills while giving example. And the second one doesn't showcase the skills. I agree with that. I don't think it goes into as much detail about what he's learned from the dance show, whereas the first one, we can see that he's improved his communication skills, he's improved his team working skills, and he's developed new routines each week. So really, for each experience, try and think, what have you learned from that? What skills have you gained? Yeah, and then we can go on to the third one.
So for the next section of your statement, you'd be looking at explaining your academic experience. So that can be work that you've done in school or college that has prepared you for university. And just to link back to what Eugenia said before, you can use your judgment on whether you think you should put this as your second paragraph or your third one. If you're doing something really career focused, where you know exactly what job you're going into, you might want to start with the work experience as paragraph 2. Or if you feel like work experience is a little less relevant for your course, or you don't have necessarily completely aligned work experience, you might want to prioritize putting your academic paragraph second instead of third. So you can use your judgment on the placement of this, but we recommend having it near the start, as in either paragraph 2 or paragraph 3. Here, you'll talk about how your studies will help you to progress into higher education. So it's best to think about your most recent studies. So that would be your level 3 qualifications, whether those are T levels, BTECs, or A levels, and then picking out something really precise and specific from your studies, such as a project or a topic or a unit that has particularly resonated with you, that you've gained some really concrete knowledge or skills from, and just explaining a little bit about that in this section. Again, avoid trying to cover everything, avoid trying to list all of the different things you've learned. The person reading your statement, the admissions tutor, will know that if you have gone through a level 3 qualification, you have got lots of knowledge, but what they want to know specifically is what exactly have you enjoyed and what skill have you really excelled in. So try to just pick out a couple of examples from your studies rather than trying to cover everything, so that you can really be clear on some of the detail in the knowledge that you have. So with that in mind, let's have a look again at some examples, picking out the best one once we've heard both. Starting with the first one here from Malala, who was applying for human rights. She says, "My school campaign for girls to be in education has prepared me for studying a human rights degree as it taught me the value of education and the importance of standing up for one's rights."
Number 2, when I was at school, I was a passionate advocate for female education. Leading this project gave me the skills, experience, and insight I need to study human rights at university and furthered my passion for standing up for one's beliefs.
So if you think number 1 might be a better example, raise your hand now.
I don't think we have many for number 1.
If you think number 2 might be a better example, raise your hand now. Excellent, I can see that one's a popular one. If we could mention in the chat why we think number 2 is a strong response, that would be really helpful. And Eugenia, if you could let me know once we have some ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll give people maybe 15, 20 more seconds.
Whether you think number 1 or number 2, I will say both are well written, both are clear and relevant. So it'd be interesting to hear ideas for each one, why 1 or 2 might be better. There isn't a clear answer on this one.
So we've got one comment about number 2 being well written. I agree. I think we've got a little bit more academic language in number 2. So instead of saying my school campaign for girls, we've got passionate advocate for female education. What I would say with that one, as Sophie mentioned, they are both strong examples. So if you feel that yours looks like number 1, that's absolutely fine. What you could think about is how can you change your language slightly just to bring it up to that level of number 2. So it could be that number 1 is a first draft and number 2 is a second draft, or maybe number 1 is even a third draft and number 2 is a fourth draft. So once you've written your personal statements, absolutely fine, and it's expected to go back and improve it and create a few drafts. We've also got a comment. Oh, okay, so again, another comment we've got on academic language about saying it taught me the value of education, whereas the second one said it furthered my passion for standing up for one's beliefs. So I've got a few comments on the language.
What I would say as well, number 2, as Eugenia made a really good point, they're both like relevant examples. Number 2 is maybe just slightly more developed in that it has picked out a specific project that has been carried out by this student. And that links back to what I was saying before, where you want to not just kind of state what you're studying, but try to pick out an example of something that you've done that has particularly given you expertise or passion or enthusiasm, and communicate that in your examples. So what they've said here is that they did a project on female education, and then they've gone on to start to discuss the skills that they've gained. I'd say for a third draft, it might be even better if they could include some of those really clear skills. So what did they actually include in their project? And what are their skills? Are they communication? Are they researching information? Are they presenting to a group? So we could do a little bit more here even further to go into more detail on that project. But yeah, it's tricky because you also can't add too much information. So it's about being concise. Only a sentence or 2 would be needed to be added here to summarize this paragraph.
And just a quick note as well, that maybe the main difference between number 2, apart from obviously the language and how they've gone into a little bit more detail, is that they've put that they're leading the project. So if you've done any projects, even if you weren't the leader of that project, but you were in charge of timekeeping or you created the presentation, that could be a really good thing to put in your personal statement. So really reflect on what work you've done, how you worked in a team, what role you played in that team as well. It can just help add a little bit more detail to your personal statement. So number 4, we've got, are you involved in any sports, clubs or activities? So for this one, even if the sport or the club that you are part of isn't directly linked to your subject, as we mentioned a little bit earlier when we spoke about structure, think about how you can make it relevant. So what skills have you learned that will be really helpful in the subject that you're applying for? So, for example, if you are a football captain, think about the different skills that you need for that. So, for example, working as a team, timekeeping, um, leadership that could be really relevant for the subject that you're applying for. And even though your personal statement, a lot of it is focused on the academic work, there is a still chance for you to show your hobbies and show your interests, because university isn't only about studying that specific subject, but there's also lots of opportunities to take part in societies and extracurricular activities. So it's absolutely fine and encouraged to put in other things and your other interests, because that's something that we might not be able to see just from your grades or your details about the school that's on UCAS. But just to take those details to the next level, try and think, how can they be transferable? How can you make them relevant to what you're applying for? So we can go on to the example, and we've got Boris Johnson. So again, we're going to read out the two, and then we'll ask you which one you think is the stronger example. So number 1. Recently, I took part in the school play where I got the chance to experience all aspects of theatre, from staging to performing. This was an invaluable experience for me as I learnt to work as a team to tight deadlines and we achieved a shared goal.
Number 2, in school, I enjoy performing. I always love a joke with my mates, always entertaining. I'm pretty great at it. I'm fantastic at improvisation, in fact. I don't even need a script. Also, one of my skills is pointing and umming.
Okay, so I would like you to put your hands up if you think number 1 is the stronger example. I think we've got quite a few coming in there. And put your hands up if you think number 2 is the strongest example. Yeah, I think we've got almost everyone putting their hands down for number 2. So number 1, I completely agree with you. We're going to give you 30 seconds just to put in the chat, what is it about number 1 or what is it about number 2 that makes it not as strong as number 1? So we've got 1 point which is saying that number 2 is enthusiastic, but not sure how pointing and umming is helpful for university. Completely agree. The enthusiasm is really important. We saw in an earlier example where they described their dance show as hard and grueling and tough, which came off as quite negative. Whereas here, we can definitely see number 2 that they really enjoy the subject, which is what lecturers are looking for. But the examples that they give aren't very specific or detailed to the subject that they're applying for, and they're not very academic.
Yeah, I would say the tone as well is not quite serious enough for the work that they're doing. The academic isn't looking to see that having a joke is a priority. They want to know that the student is taking the subject really seriously, so thinking more carefully about which skills are relevant for that course to make it more appropriate for the tone of the statement.
We also have a comment similar to that number 1 has stronger vocabulary. And yeah, as we said, we completely agree with that. It's about kind of making sure your vocabulary is more formal. And then I think we've got our final comment that number 2 isn't very detailed, which again, we definitely agree. Number 1 goes into the details of the staging and the performing. I would say number 1, we don't get as much detail about what the play is, but we do get a lot of detail on what skills have been gained, which is the key thing that we want to bring out. If in number 1, perhaps if they had slightly more word count, they can go into a bit more detail if they played the lead role in the play. But really the main thing we want to bring out is what your experience was, what the skills are. And that might mean that you give slightly less context, like in number one, but you really focus on your own experience in there.
So we're going to move on now to another question you might think about. This one's kind of tied in with the previous question, which was about kind of clubs and societies. This is your opportunity, if you haven't mentioned anything that feels relevant in terms of the skills that you gained, to include it here as well. So you might be thinking about any additional hobbies and interests that you haven't already mentioned, any kind of personal experiences, whether you've potentially gone traveling or learned about different cultures and backgrounds, maybe any languages that you speak on top of your studies. So it's just a great opportunity to sell yourself as a whole person, to kind of show that you're very well rounded and prepared to offer a lot more to university life than simply just your academic studies. So it's similar to the last slide, but it's just anything that we haven't already covered under the heading of clubs and societies. So again, 2 examples here from Marcus Rashford. Let's have a look which one is the stronger example and why. I really like helping people. I've taken part in some community projects that made a big difference, which felt really good. And this has helped me to decide that politics is the right career for me.
Number 2, outside of school, I'm a champion for young people. I believe they should have access to basic necessities such as food and education. Recently, I contacted my local MP, and as a result, we were able to change the policy around free school meals. This has given me further motivation to study a degree in politics.
Okay, hands up if you think number 1 is a better example. And hands up for number 2.
Yeah, I think we have a lot more hands for number 2.
Perfect. I'm just going to summarize why number 2 is a really strong example here, because we're conscious to give you enough time for your Q&A at the end. Especially if you're doing both sessions, we want to make sure we get everything sorted. So number 2 is really strong because they have been really specific about what skills they have gained in their kind of involvement in local politics. So they said they contacted the MP, they've assisted in changing the policy. So that's really specific to the impact they've made, and they've linked that back to their course as well, showing how the skills they have implemented outside of the classroom have also given them a really good grounding for future study. So it's that link that he's made between the work that he's done and the course that he's doing that is a really strong example of how to structure this paragraph. Some of the extra skills that you have might not feel always directly applicable. I know this one does feel quite relevant. But if you can think about the skills that you've gained from that additional area and how they are relevant to your course, that's how you can tie things together and keep it feeling really focused on exactly what makes you an asset to a university environment.
So finally, we have the conclusion. I'm not going to say too much about it because we covered it a little bit earlier on in the session. So we're going to go straight onto the examples. And I would like you to let me know which one you think is the stronger example. So number 1, I believe I would excel as a dance student at university thanks to my experience in dance competitions, my lifelong passion for being on stage, and my skills as a team player.
Number 2, to conclude, I believe I'd be a great dance student because I've danced in lots of competitions before, such as the time when I was on Strictly Come Dancing, where I also had to work as a team player. I also know that I'm driven and motivated thanks to my career in competitive boxing, where I've trained 7 days a week, 10 hours a day.
So I'd like you to put your hands up if you think number 1 is the stronger example. And number 2. Okay, I don't think we had anyone for number 1, but we have lots for number 2. I will say I disagree. I think number one is the stronger example. Number two is a great piece of writing, and it does go into the different skills that they learn. However, in the conclusion, you want to make sure that your conclusion is short and to the point, so about 2 sentences or a few lines. The reason is, in your conclusion, you don't want to bring in lots of new information. In number two, they've brought in that they've trained for 7 days a week, 10 hours a day. They've spoken about being on Strictly Come Dancing, and they've gone into a lot of detail about the different skills that they've gained. However, if they're putting all that information into their conclusion, it means that they're not giving themselves space to write about that in detail earlier on. So that would be a great paragraph for their extracurricular activities, or even how they've been prepared academically to study dance. But in the conclusion, they're just not giving themselves the space to write in a lot of detail. What you'd like to do in your conclusion is just summarize what you've said already, and you can bring in one new point, maybe about what you would like to do after university. But any kind of fantastic examples of the work you've done, or the projects you've done, or the hobbies you have should go in earlier in your personal statement. So
Yeah, just to reiterate, the conclusion, really the purpose of that is just to show your academic writing skills. So it's not to introduce any new information, it's just to showcase that you have summarized this piece of text in an appropriate way in just 1 or 2 sentences. And to link back to what I said before, if you're looking at the 2026 entry instead of 25, a conclusion won't even be necessary. So that kind of goes to show that you shouldn't really be putting any key information here, because that's not where the admissions tutor will be looking for the bulk of your writing. It's really just on this 2025 statement to showcase your academic writing skills. You're able to conclude a piece of text. So don't dwell too much on it, and try not to waste too many of your characters. And that's why 1 is such a good example, because it's very brief and clear. So we've mentioned quite a few of these already. So I'm just going to pull out a couple that we might not have already said. It might be an idea to take a note of any of these if you're not already aware of them. But our main kind of do's and don'ts would be to be prepared to write a few drafts, and to set yourself deadlines of when you want to have those drafts submitted and checked by as many people as you can. Make sure what you say is honest. You may have to go to interview and explain a bit more in detail about the things that you said. So be prepared to be honest, and link it to real life experiences that you have. Make sure you do your research, especially around your course. You want to be really clear on the connections between your current learning and your future learning, to show that you have the understanding of what to expect. The admissions team want to know that you are going to follow through with this, and that you're going to be well suited. So to be able to show that really clearly, you have to be able to show that you understand the course and that you're prepared to study it. In terms of things to make sure not to do, make sure all of the words you use are your own. Some students like to write a hook for their opening paragraph. They like to sometimes put quotes in. The thing with this is that you're limiting the characters you can use for your own examples, for your own inspirations, for your own skills. So don't use any quotes, because there's just simply not enough words. I know in your English literature previously, you might have been told to use quotes, but this is not a piece of text you would do that in. Make sure you do try to aim for the word count, 4,000 characters. That's a really good guide, that you have gone into enough detail. If you're under that, you're probably needing to add more explanation on kind of academic studies, or potentially work experience. And as we have mentioned already, avoid listing and avoid grammatical errors as well.
So if you'd like some further support with your personal statements, we have a personal statement review service, which you can use online. It's completely free and there's no obligation. All you need to do is either scan the QR code, or I will also put a link into the chat. And what you do is fill out your email, what you're applying for, and upload your personal statement as a Word document. Please save the personal statement with your name. just to make it easier for us when we're sending it back to you. And we'll review it and send it back to you within 2 weeks, probably a little bit sooner than that as well. And we'll also send you our personal statement booklet, which covers a lot of the points that we've gone through today, if you just want a written version of that. And there are a few more resources there to help you. So you're really welcome to use that service, and it can be really helpful just to have someone to look over the personal statement and just leave you a few comments about what you can improve, maybe how you might restructure or reduce word count as well.
Another thing we really wanted to promote with you, because we know we have a few students who are interested in health and social care careers. We've really excitingly got an event coming up in March. Please do take a note of this. You can take a picture of the screen or write it down. We'll be hosting lots of different NHS professionals from a range of different settings at the university on the 6th of March at 4:30 until 7 p.m. So it's a really good chance to be able to go around, to interact with people from many different careers, to ask them questions about what they do, about entry routes into different jobs as well, and just anything in general you might be wanting to find out about. You can sign up online if you'd like to join. You can book your place with the QR code, or if you research on our website for the NHS Health and Social Care Careers Fair, you can book your place there as well. And yeah, we hope to see you. It's also a really good chance to explore the university space, to get an insight into the quad area where we'll be hosting. And there's also some talks as well with different panelists who'll be able to give you some further insights into different careers in the NHS. So please do come along. And as I said, take a note if you are interested.
I have put lots of links in the chat for the things that we've mentioned today. So we've got a link for our personal statement review service, got a link to our NHS social care careers fair, and also our upcoming open day on the 22nd of February. Really recommend going along to open days because it's such a good chance to learn a little bit more about the university if you're thinking of applying or you've applied already and you're considering your different choices. There's always opportunities to speak to students, speak to staff, go to some example lectures as well and see the facilities. If you're thinking of commuting to university, it can also be a good chance for you to test out the commute. Just for context, for our open day, we are based in Hendon, so that's on the Northern Line just above Camden. And our open day is on Saturday, the 22nd of February. If you aren't able to make that, you can also come for a campus tour. So that's every Wednesday between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. And I've put the link for that in the chat as well. We've got a few minutes now.